Story 1, The Crawl Space. Hi there. I guess you could say I'm writing this as a cautionary tale to those who plan on studying abroad in future. I don't mean to discourage you from going in the first place. It's more like I just want you to be aware of this so that something like this doesn't happen to you too. I guess I should explain a little bit. Last summer I was selected to participate in the study abroad program that would be centered in Rome for several months. Like anyone would be, I was elated. I had never been out of the States before, so this was going to be a real adventure for me. In the weeks that followed, I happily packed anything and everything I could fit into my suitcase. I will be the first to admit that I had way overpacked for this trip. I was nervous about leaving my parents for the first time, but I was also excited for the newfound freedom I would have while in Europe. Before I knew it, my parents were dropping me off at the airport, and I was boarding a 19-hour flight to Rome. Despite being long and tedious, the flight wasn't all that bad. When I exited the airport, I was greeted by the program supervisor and several other students who would be studying with me. They were about the same age and all looked just as excited as me. From there we went to our mandatory orientation meeting, and afterwards we went to pick up our apartment keys. In the months that preceded the trip, we were responsible for getting to know our would-be roommates as well as finding a place to stay that we could all afford. There were 3 girls I would be staying with. They were all nice enough and made an effort to make me feel welcome, though I will admit it's a bit hard to get close to the group of preform friends. But despite my slight alienation, it seemed that things were all going to work out well. All of us were on a similar budget plan, and by that I mean none of us really had much money to spend. Because of this, we were all on the same page while searching for the cheapest apartment we could find. After several days of searching, we stumbled across an ad for an ancient apartment located above the Campo di Fiore. That was a prime location, and we couldn't believe it that it was still available, no less listed for an unbelievably low price. This immediately sent alarm bells off in my head. The place was enormous, yet the rent was cheaper than the much smaller apartments and a far less desirable part of town. However, reason never really wins out in a group of excited young women. They had already made up their minds, and if I would be staying with them, this was my only option. We each received our own set of keys as well as a map with walking directions. Because of its prime location, it really didn't take us long to get there. The Campo was amazing. During the daytime, it was filled with a vibrant market, while during the evening it was lined with lively street performers. All of the apartments surrounding it looked to be ancient, so ours really didn't stand out all that much. After circling the square 3 or 4 times, he finally noticed the number nailed to the front of a massive old wooden door. This would be our home for the next 3 months. I fought with my keys for a moment until there was an audible click of the heavy old lock. The thick old door swung forward with a screech. We were then met with a long winding staircase. We all looked at one another and groaned. None of us had accounted for the fact that the building had been constructed before elevators were common. So 3 sets of stairs and countless complaints later, all 4 of us, with luggage in hand, stood outside our new front door. Once again I reached for my set of keys and fought with the stubborn lock. As soon as the front door was open, there was a stampede of young women trying to claim the best rooms. Being a 3-bedroom apartment, it meant that two of us would have to share. I personally didn't really care, so I let the others battle it out. When the dust had settled, I found that I would be sharing a room with a girl called Stephanie. That was fine with me. Stephanie was nice enough, and she was also very quiet, my ideal feature in a roommate. Over the course of the rest of the day, we ran around exploring our new home. There were 2 bathrooms, a full kitchen, and a living room with an ancient TV. Once again I began to feel uneasy. Just how was it that we were able to get all of this for such a low price? But before I could finish the thought, I was interrupted by a fit of loud squealing. My initial reaction was to panic. However, I soon learned that all the noise was from excitement. Down at the other end of the apartment, near the front door, apparently, there was another part of the flat we had missed. I followed the nose until it led me to a long, dark hallway. There at the end, behind the group of squealing women, was a washing and drying machine. For those of you thinking, what's the big deal? I should explain that these things are incredibly rare in Rome. Generally, exchange students have to wash their clothes by hand in the sink before hanging them up to dry. What was a luxury item like this doing in such a cheap apartment? Just as the screaming quelled, it picked right back up again as the girls noticed a door adjacent to the washing machine. Beyond that door was a master bathroom. It had a balcony, a clawfoot tub, and even a bidet. The girls immediately started fighting over whose bathroom this was going to be. I didn't really see why we couldn't share, but apparently the others were dead set on having ownership. As it turned out, it ended up being my bathroom. Stephanie had made a logical argument that because she and I had to share a bedroom, while the other two each got their own, it was only fair that she and I got share the master bath. And I'll admit that at first I was actually kind of excited. It was, after all, a really nice room. However, over the course of the next several weeks, I began to grow more and more wary of the room. I don't know how to put it into words. It's like every time I went into that room, I could feel something's eyes on me. And the voyeuristic element wasn't really what had me so unnerved. It felt like whatever was watching me was angry, that it didn't want me there, and that it wanted to hurt me. I began doing everything in my power to avoid the room. I asked Alicia if she would mind if I were to use her restroom occasionally. I made up a lame excuse about how it was far more convenient, since her room was so close, while my bathroom was at the other end of the flat at the end of the very long hallway. She happily agreed, though, when I told her that she could use my bathroom any time she liked. This worked well for a while. For about the first 2 months of my trip, I was able to completely avoid the eerie room. It wasn't until the final month that everything began to unravel. One night, as I prepared to brush my teeth, I found that Alicia was already occupying her bathroom. I could hear giggles coming from down the hallway. It was clear both Stephanie and our other roommate were both getting ready for bed in the master bath. I decided that since there was strength in numbers, it would be all right just for tonight. So I made my way down to the large bathroom, where I joined the boisterous girls in brushing my teeth. They were in the midst of some conversation when Lindsay, our other roommate, had broken into such a furious fit of laughter that she had to lean on the wall for support. But suddenly she jolted upright, as if she had been shocked. We all looked at what had been the cause of her reaction. There on the wall, about the same level as the bathtub, was a tiny door. None of us had noticed it because it was the same color as walls. The landlord had even painted over it. Naturally, this made me a bit nervous. Whatever it was, the landlord clearly didn't want anyone opening it, but as usual, throwing all caution to the wind, Lindsay reached for the handle and began tugging with all her might. Stephanie clucked her tongue in disapproval before pulling out a small pocket knife. She began delicately carving along the seam of the door. I wanted to beg her to stop, but I really didn't have the energy to argue that night. So within a few minutes, Lindsay had yanked the little door open with a loud crack. It was a crawl space that was fairly large. My guess would have been you could have fit at least 3 or 4 people in there. I was rather curious as to why the landlord would have sealed up an empty little room. While I thought about this, Stephanie and Lindsay began calling for Alicia to come see their new discovery. She was just as excited as they were when they first discovered it. However, as could be expected, this excitement waned over time, and eventually the crawl space was just turned into storage for a few towels and laundry baskets. In the following day, after the unsealing of the crawl space, things started to go from eerie to downright terrifying. Annoyingly, Alicia had changed her nightly routine so that I could no longer use her bathroom in the evenings. Once again, I was back in the large bathroom, all the while the feeling that I was being watched growing worse and worse. I began to get so paranoid each time I went into that room that I would literally jump at the slightest noise of pipes settling, and as soon as I was finished I would run at full speed down the hallway and close the door behind me. For some reason I seemed to be the only one feeling this way. It's not like I could have told the other girls either. I was already enough of an outcast as it was, so I just kept to myself and hoped it would go away eventually. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. One night as I was getting ready for bed, I found myself alone in the bathroom. As I stood in front of the mirror brushing my teeth, something set the hairs on the back of my neck straight up. There was a faint rustling noise, not the kind that could have been caused from my roommates at the other end of the flat. Any noises caused by them would have had to have been quite loud to reach me all the way at the end of the long hallway. No, this noise was very faint, the sound of someone gingerly shuffling things around. I stood completely silent, terror filling me. The soft rustling noise was coming from inside the crawl space. I turned on my heels and ran down the hallway to grab the attention of my roommates. I tried to explain to them what happened, but all that came out were incoherent murmurs. Eventually I managed to stutter as something's inside the crawl space. They looked at me with fear and confusion in their eyes. As a pack we moved together down the hallway into the bathroom. I nearly fainted when I saw the tiny door hanging fully ajar. Though this discovery filled me with horror, Alicia immediately pointed to the balcony's sliding door. Stephanie had left it open to air out the bathroom after having taken a shower several hours ago. She peeked her head out the door and pointed to the slanted rooftop adjacent to ours. There was a pigeon's nest occupied by few birds. The girls surmised that a pigeon must have found its way in and was the cause of the disturbance. They all had a good laugh as we made our way back to the living room. I pretended to shake it off, but I knew it was not a pigeon that caused the rustling noise. First off, the tiny door had been shut tight all day. None of us really cared to leave it open because it smelled quite musty inside. And secondly, the door had been shut when I left the bathroom. I am certain of this, yet there it was wide open when I returned. You're not going to tell me that a pigeon knows how to and is capable of opening and closing a door all by itself. It was at this point that I began to suspect that something was terribly wrong with this apartment. When I got back to my room, I pulled out my laptop and called my best friend via Skype. She had always been the skeptical and methodical type. However, she also kept an open mind towards things that were hard to explain. I decided that out of anyone, she was probably the best to talk to about my situation. As I expected, she was initially quite doubtful, though she also agreed with me that a pigeon was quite likely not the source. She asked me if I had any photos of the crawl space. She said that if she could see it, that would help her to understand a little more clearly and possibly help her to come up with a more logical explanation. Relieved at her willingness to at least hear me out, I reached for my camera and made my way back down the eerie hallway. When I arrived, I found, to my relief, that the door was still closed. I stood in front of it for a moment, gathering my nerve before finally pulling the little door open. Despite the clutter left inside by my roommates, it was empty. I snapped a quick photo before closing the door once more and running back to my room. I immediately plugged my camera into my computer and uploaded the photo. When I finally opened the image, I was petrified by what I saw. There in the upper right-hand corner was a face baring its teeth at me. My whole body began violently shaking. Dear God, that thing is in our home, I muttered to myself. Fear began to overtake me. Someone had sealed whatever it was inside of that crawl space, and we had let it out. I was so absorbed in my panic I didn't even notice when my roommate returned. She was so blissfully unaware of the imminent danger we were in. Yet even if I tried to warn her, she would not believe me. I was at a loss of what to do, and finally decided that I would deal with it in the morning. Though not by a large amount, I did feel braver in the sunlight. From there I attempted to get some sleep, though for the first time ever since being there I closed and bolted my door before getting into bed. Stephanie eyed me suspiciously while doing so, but I just told her jokingly that Lindsay had been sneaking into our room the previous nights and had been stealing my Nutella. She laughed heartily, shaking her head before settling down for the night. I will admit that the only reason I was able to find any sleep that night was because of her presence. Something about not being alone can give one a sense of false security. It was about 2:00 in the morning when the sound woke me. I had always been a light sleeper, so the faint noise was enough to stir me. It sounded like a door being pushed open at the other end of the flat, followed by footsteps. But these weren't just normal footsteps. They were far too fast. It sounded like someone was running at full speed from the floor to the living room and all about the apartment. But these weren't heavy footfalls like the kind you would expect from a running person. They were very light, almost unnaturally so. My initial reaction was to assume it was either Alicia or Lindsay, so I got up and stuck my ear to the wall behind me that separated Lindsay's room from mine. I could hear her faint but steady breathing. She was clearly asleep. It wasn't her. I then crossed over to the other side of my room near the door and once again stuck my ear to the wall. Alicia's snoring was quite audible. There's no way it was her. I slowly began to grow fearful as I turned in a last resort to see if Stephanie had perhaps gotten up, but I could plainly see her resting form silently rising up and down. A shiver went down my spine, and I nearly screamed when I realized that the footsteps had come to a stop outside of my door. Despite all the lights being out, I could clearly see the looming dark shadow of a form through the tiny crack at the foot of my door. I dared not move, whatever it was. It was just standing there, waiting. Then, to my horror, my doorknob slowly began to jiggle, gently at first, but then growing violent at the realization of it being locked. The noise of it eventually woke my roommate. She sat up, blinking in confusion. That instant, the jiggling of the doorknob stopped. She asked me just what the hell I was doing and if I knew what time it was. I told her it wasn't me. I told her that whatever had opened the door to the crawl space the previous day had come back, but she just furrowed her brow at me and said that I needed to get more sleep. The next day I made an appointment with my program's supervisor. I told him that I just needed to go home. He tried to tell me that I was just homesick and that it would pass, but I insisted. He eventually gave up and let me call my parents. They were confused but understanding. They were able to change the date of my return flight to the following morning. I really wanted to get out of there that day, but understandably, that was the soonest they could manage. Unfortunately, this meant that I would have to stay one more night in the apartment. When I returned, I tried to tell the others about what had been going on. I knew I was going to be getting out of there and would be out of danger, but I was still immensely worried for their safety. But none of them took me seriously. They looked at me as if I was a mad woman. They didn't say anything, but I was sure they all thought I was going home because of some sort of mental breakdown. At that point, there was nothing I could say that would convince them. So that night, I locked my door and hesitantly went to bed. And right on cue, once again around 2 o'clock in the morning, I was awoken by the rapid footsteps scampering around the apartment. I could hear the door to the bathroom begin to creak open, followed by the door at the end of the hallway. The footsteps grew louder and faster as they moved through the apartment. And finally, once more they came to a pause outside of my door. I could hear breathing this time, slow and heavy. I sat up in panic, and to my horror I saw that Stephanie had forgotten to lock the door behind her after getting up to use the restroom. It was right outside my door, and I did not know if I had time to jump up and try to lock it before the thing realized there was nothing blocking its way. I hesitated a moment too long, and by the time I had sat up straight in my bed, the handle slowly began to turn. I froze in terror as the door cracked open, revealing my tormentor. It stood there ominously in the doorway, staring me down. Its eyes protruded slightly from its skull and gave off a very faint bluish light. It didn't appear to have a nose, only slits where the nostril should have been. It had the teeth of a man, but had no lips, giving it the impression of an eternally toothy snarl. Its grayish-white skin was waxy and stretched tight over its bony face. The rest of its skeletal form was hard to make out as it was almost entirely enveloped in shadows. After pausing for a moment in the doorway, it began to head toward me. As it moved, its body let out sickening cracks. I sat there, still petrified by fear, until it had made its way to the foot of my bed. Its heavy breaths were deafeningly loud. I don't know how Stephanie slept through it. The air had begun to smell sour and stagnant. With frightening speed, it jolted to the other end of the bed, mere feet from me. I gagged at the smell of it, like sulfur and rotting flesh. Slowly it unfurled one of its along the gnarly hands and proceeded to reach for me. Not until it was several inches away did I finally find my voice. I screamed as loud as I possibly could, and it halted in its tracks. Stephanie shot up from her bed, visibly frightened. The creature hunched over on all fours and fled from the room with unsettling movements that recalled those of the spider. A moment later, Stephanie switched the light on and looked at me furiously. She demanded to know what the fuss was all about. I told her exactly what had happened, but she just called me a nutcase. The taxi came to pick me up very early the next morning. The sun had not even risen by the time it arrived. None of the girls came to see me off, but I expected this. After loading my luggage into the trunk, I climbed into the back seat of the old cab. It had driven right through the square and was sitting at the base of my apartment. When I leaned to look out the window, I could see where my room had been. My face contorted into a mixture of panic and concern. There, looking out of my old window, was the creature. Its unblinking eyes bored into me, and its lipless mouth curled into a snarling grin. Before I could say anything, the cab driver had taken off, leaving that hell house far behind. I tried to warn them. I really did. I did everything in my power to try to warn them of the danger that they were in, but none of them listened to me. There was no way I could have stopped what happened after I returned home. You see, several weeks after returning to the United States, I received a phone call from the program director. He informed me that a day before the program ended, all 3 of my past roommates had been reported missing. The authorities had no idea just how long they had actually been gone for, as they were only recently discovered to be missing when the program director went to check on them after none of them made it to the end of the program wrap-up meeting. They assumed it had been at least a week or 2. Since all the food in the apartment was expired. There was no sign of forced entry, and no valuables were missing. The only notable detail mentioned in the report was that when they arrived on the scene, there was a strange little door hanging ajar in the bathroom, and when they approached it, they were met with a powerful odor coming from no visible source. The official report has them declared as missing, but I know that they're all dead. I know that I'm incredibly lucky to have made it out with my life. I think the only reason I'm still alive today is because I fled thousands of miles and across an ocean. Despite their unwillingness to listen, I still feel an unimaginable amount of guilt over what happened to those girls. That's why I'm writing this now. I may not be able to go back in time and save them, but maybe I can prevent this from happening to you. Please, please heed my warning. If you ever get the opportunity to study abroad, keep this in mind. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And whatever you do, don't stay on the 3rd floor of the ancient yellow apartment complex above the Campo di Fiori. There's something there, something evil. Story 2. The space above the closet. My room is tiny. Of course, that's because it was built for efficiency. I don't know if you've ever stayed in a dorm room or even seen one for that matter, but I can tell you after having lived in one for the past 4 years, they're built like stackable sardine containers. My 5-star luxury quality, thousands of dollars per semester, individual dorm room measures in at a whopping 912 feet. I mean, it's practically a suite in the Hilton. You're right, sarcasm doesn't read easily in a diary journal. I'm a 22-year-old grown-ass woman writing in a notebook. It doesn't matter what I call you. You're still a goddamn diary. Ha, ha. goddamn diary. That's what I'll call you. Instead of Dear Diary, I mean. It'll be like my signature thing when anthropologists of the future find this and examine my precious words for cultural meaning. I'm sorry, I digress. Let's start again, shall we, goddamn diary? As I was saying, my room is a tiny little shit box, but that isn't the problem. Not really anyway. Like I said, I've lived here for years now, and if I'm being honest, it's not the size of my room that's bothering me. It's not really the room at all. Actually, it's the space above the closet. The space above the closet. Jesus, how ominous. Wow, I feel crazy even writing this. I sound like some kind of nutcase. But I don't know. I guess I feel like if I write it all down, everything will make sense, and I won't have to worry about it anymore, and I can just burn this stupid notebook, and then I won't have to concern myself with ruminations about the anthropologists of the future, or if I should call you a diary, or a journal, or a fucking papyrus leaf. Honestly, I just need to write this down because maybe on paper it will be sane sounding. I guess I should start from the beginning. Okay, well, write the space above the closet. Remember how I said my room is roughly 9 feet by 12 feet? Well, it's arranged so that one entire 12-foot-long wall is used up by bookshelves and a small desk, and on the opposite wall there's a single bed. It's actually pretty comfy with a topper on it, honestly. Anyway, the closet is basically just a large wooden box that fills the space between the end of the bed and the wall where the door is. All of this is mostly irrelevant, except I can't explain the space above the closet without a clear image of how the room set up. Now, the closet was built in such a way that it's not quite as tall as the room. As a result, there's a narrow space between the top of the closet and the ceiling. It's wide enough that you could store books there, I guess, or extra blankets or something, but nothing much more than that. I've never stored things there. It just never seemed right. I don't know why exactly. Well, now I have an idea. But when I first moved in, I just felt sort of like it was an inappropriate spot to keep any junk. This, of course, is deeply bizarre, since I'm probably the least tidy person in the entire universe. No empty space is safe from the wrath of my book and DVD hoarding. Regardless, I never felt right putting anything above that closet. My first 3 years in this room passed without incident. I would live in it for both school semesters, pack up my things in April after exams, go home for the summer, return inevitably to the same exact room because the housing office at my university has zero interest in making things interesting. School would go on as school does. My room would get messy. I would accumulate more books, and the stacks of written the night before essays would get higher. Oh, by the way, I'm a history major, philosophy minor, engineering dropout. I know. Go me. I'm training to be a well-read and clever intellectual. I'll be happy to discuss Kantian ethics with you between grande, non-fat, mocha, whatever the fuck orders. Point being, I own a lot of books, and I write a lot of essays. Anyway, one day a few weeks ago I was in the middle of a very important Netflix binge when an annoyingly persistent knock on the door interrupted my nearly 9-hour marathon of the X-Files. I panicked, of course, because, being me, I had completely forgotten the resident assistant was supposed to be by 4 inspections, and my room was a certified disaster. I mean full throttle, Charnado 3D, empty wine bottles, stacks of crummy dishes, probably tiny dead mouse bodies in the heat register disaster. And I mean, cut me some slack because I had also just finished slogging through a backlog of something like 30,000 words worth of essays, and all I wanted to do was eat Nutella toast and lust after Scully's hair color. So sue me, my immediate reaction was to just take the hit, let the raw come in, give me a dirty look, and then write me up for uncleanliness. But my deeply buried, ancient evolutionary, uterus-owning homemaker sense must have kicked in, and I have to say I pulled off some kind of the flash shit in that moment. And when the raw came in, she just said, "Cool. See you later," and that was it. No uncleanliness sanctioned for me. But to get back to the point, when I was in the middle of my miracle tiding frenzy, I didn't have time to be worried about the space above the closet and my uneasiness about putting things there. All I knew was that I had a lot of dirty dishes that needed a hiding place, and the closet space was it. So I stacked a couple of bowls and some plates on top of each other, and I shoved them as far toward the wall on top of the closet as my arm would reach, so they weren't visible. All the rest of the clutter, including the nearly empty wine bottles, got spirited away into the drawers under my bed, and that, kids, is how all my socks got purple stains on them. Truth be told, I actually kind of forgot about those dishes on top of the closet for a while. When the raw left, I went straight back to my X-Files binge, and I didn't remember the dishes until the following morning when I woke up. Okay, it was afternoon. Don't judge me. Well, luckily, that same day an urge struck me to tidy my room, actually tidy it. Maybe with exams approaching, I felt like a clean room would make for a clean mind. Right. In any case, I wanted a clean room. While I was deciding where to begin, I suddenly remembered the dirty dishes above my closet and thought that washing them would put me off to a good start. So I climbed on top of my bed, reached all the way back to where I had pushed the stack of dirties, and felt I was confused. I stood on my toes and looked into the crevice. I even got a flashlight and inspected the space, although that was unnecessary because I could see all the way to the wall as it was. I shook my head, perplexed, wondering if I had already cleaned the dishes. Perhaps I had picked up a new habit, sleep cleaning, as convenient as that would be. It seemed an unlikely explanation. Sleep cleaning or not, whatever the explanation, the dishes were undoubtedly no longer above the closet. I plunked down on my bed, thoroughly weirded out. Then I looked around my room, wondering if maybe I had already retrieved the dishes and simply forgotten about it. I mean, maybe too much Netflix really does burn holes in the brain. Who knows? But I didn't see the dishes anywhere. I checked my drawers, too, and besides my newly wine-stained socks, no dishes were to be found. I left my room and padded barefoot down the hallway to the little communal kitchen, where I looked through every cupboard, thinking maybe I had imagined the dirty dishes entirely. But none of my personally labeled plates and bowls were around. Oh, and by the way, you'd be stupid not to label things at university. That shit isn't just for summer camp. Labeling is serious business. I meandered back to my room, all the way quite literally scratching my head at the case of the missing dishes. If I were Mulder, I would have been thrilled about the missing dishes. An X-file in the making. But instead I was just confused. So I did what every good university student does when a problem can't be solved. I decided to take a nap. Of course, as a fourth-year student, I am required to occasionally appear responsible. As such, I set an alarm on my phone so that I wouldn't sleep longer than half an hour. Laid down on my bed, took one last weirded out look at that spot above the closet, and closed my eyes, only to be woken up by a huge crashing sound. 15 minutes later, I jolted awake, smacking my head on the wall beside my bed and frantically looking around for the source of the noise. In that moment of panic, I swear I saw a quick, shadowy movement above the closet. What that could have been my imagination. What really mattered, though, what really caught my attention, was the pile of broken dishes on the floor beside the foot of my bed. A pile that, for everything in the world, looked just like it was in the right spot to have been shoved from the top of the closet. What's more, though, is that although the 2 bowls and few plates were in shards, they were all impeccably clean. Not a crumb or butter smear or layer of dried milk to be found. I know you must be wondering, goddamn diary, how does a person rationalize such an event? Well, let me tell you, as a proud engineering dropout turned art student and certified horror sci-fi lover, a vague knowledge of dark matter theory, combined with a philosophical mindset and a propensity for concocting creepy tales, does not always a rational person make. Luckily, that same combination of characteristics meant I could refrain from spiraling instantly into crippling fear. I thought to myself, okay, so I just experienced some seriously weird physics anomaly. Generally creepy shit, but this is my zone. I totally got this. In fact, my first instinct was to ask myself, what horror movie is this from, and how does it end? Because I was sure I must have managed to produce some paranormal activity using only the power of my imagination, a la the apparition, or a la the Philip experiment, if you want to go real life on that shit. I mean, if anyone could do it, it would be me. I've seen enough bad Hollywood ghost movies, but I can't deny that I was a little bit freaked out. At some point, my rationality did kick back and I decided stupidly that I must have just somehow not seen the dishes earlier, and they were like on the very edge or something, and they just fell off the top of the closet. I ignored the fact that such an explanation made little to no sense, and that it still didn't explain the fact that all the dish shards appeared to be spotless. But that tenuous explanation made just as much sense as me magically creating a creepy dish cleaning, top of closet dwelling ghost with the power of my mind. Then my phone alarm went off, and that, of course, startled me. A girl just can't catch a break when dishes are involved. Needless to say, I tracked down a neighbor who owned a broom, cleaned up the pathetic little pile of impeccably clean but irreparably shattered glass, and went back to ignoring the space above the closet. But I had trouble sleeping that night, and the next, and the next. I had trouble sleeping for a week after that incident because I couldn't stop thinking about the shadowy crevice and the incident with the dishes. So a week and a half after what I now call the dish day, on a sunny Saturday morning, when most other 22-year-olds were probably nursing hangovers, I decided to run some experiments on the space above the closet. The first test I did was with a piece of paper, just a simple blank piece of printer paper with nothing written on it and no marks. I placed it on top of the closet and pushed it as far back toward the wall as I could. Then I sat on my bed, started the stopwatch app on my phone, and waited. At 14 minutes and 22 seconds the piece of paper was shoved from the top of the closet by some unseen force. Before it even landed on the ground, I had bolted to my feet atop the bed to catch the mysterious culprit in action. By this point I was thinking maybe rats were to blame again. Unlikely story. But the crevice was empty. Disappointed, I retrieved the piece of paper from the ground and examined it. Nothing had changed. No marks had appeared. It was not torn. In fact, it wasn't even wrinkled or creased. I resolved to continue experimenting. I decided the blank paper was kind of like a control, and that I would use the same sheet at the end of my experimenting to try and make the whole stupid process a little bit more legit. So I set aside the first sheet of paper and grabbed another. This time I wrote something on it. Just my name in large black letters, all caps, across the middle of the page. R-I-P-L-E-Y, yes. I am named after Sigourney Weaver's character in Alien. Complaints go to my mother. Once again, I placed the paper on top of the closet as far back as I could reach, started the stopwatch app, and waited. This time I stayed standing. I stayed standing for 23 minutes and 11 seconds watching that paper, and it didn't so much as flutter. Exasperated, I flopped down on my bed. 2 seconds later, the paper flew off the top of the closet. I scrambled to retrieve it from the floor, and when I did, I was disappointed to find that it had not been altered. Not to be discouraged so easily, however, I decided to add something to the writing and try again. Hello, my name is R-I-P-L-E-Y. Once again, I positioned the paper atop the closet and started the stopwatch. At exactly 13 minutes, the paper fluttered from the crevice to the ground. It was writing side down. When I retrieved it, I turned it over. My writing was gone, and when I say gone, I mean gone without a trace. I had written my message in permanent marker, and not a single spot was left on the page. Not so much as a faint shadow of lettering. In tiny, neat, penciled freehand, however, on the very bottom of the page were the words, I know, well, I nearly completely lost my shit. I had no idea what to do. Prior to conducting my little experiment, I had every intention of continuing until I could figure out what was going on with my closet crevice. But those 2 little words freaked me out so much that I simply grabbed my coat and my purse, threw on some shoes, and went for a walk to clear my head. Halfway around the block, I realized I had to go back. I had to dig deeper. I asked myself, what would Dana Scully do? Well, she would investigate the occurrence as if it were a rationally explainable phenomenon until something undeniable led her to believe otherwise. But Fox Mulder, well, what would Mulder do? I bet if the X-Files were set in 2015, the first thing Mulder would do would be to Google paranormal phenomenon relating to closets. So that's what I did. I went immediately home, and although while deliberately avoiding any glances toward the mysterious closet space, I typed into Chrome paranormal closet. Some results came up. The first result was a site dedicated to helping people come out of the closet by comparing the experience of realizing homosexuality to that of experiencing the paranormal. I mean, I've never had to come out of the closet, but the article was pretty convincing. There was also a Reddit thread entitled Old Man in My Closet. I didn't click on it, and a few YouTube videos, presumably shoddy attempts at special effects, showing paranormal closet occurrences, but none of them resembled my invisible closet top-dwelling companion. whatever. After a few more attempts at various internet searches, I just gave up, resolving that I was on my own with this one and leaning heavily toward the Dana Scully approach. I would explore every option before writing it all off as a personally experienced X-File phenomenon. I would continue to experiment with the closet space, exchanging letters with the mysterious void. Retrospectively, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. Maybe the Mulder approach would have allowed me to forget about the dish date and those 2 words I know. Maybe Mulder would have just been able to chalk it all up to a bizarre, fascinating experience and then let it go, move on. But no, I decided to be Scully. I decided to push it. I grabbed the piece of paper with "I know" written on it and decided to keep it as proof. For everyone else, it would just look like 2 words on a piece of paper, but to me it was solid evidence of my experience. I didn't want to risk losing it. I picked a 3rd piece of paper from my shelf and wrote on it, "What's your name?" I delivered the paper to the top of the closet, sat on my bed, and started the stopwatch. At 10 minutes and 35 seconds, the paper floated from the top of the closet, this time directly onto the bed instead of the floor. Not important, it read. My writing was gone. I decided to use the same piece of paper for the next question. Directly under the closet being's writing, I scribbled, "Are you real?" At 6 minutes and 15 seconds, the paper landed on my bed, blank once again except for the answer. Evidently so, I thought to myself. So the closet is a smart ass, then, and scribbled my next question. "If you're real, why can't I see you?" At the 4-minute and 21-second mark, the paper landed with the response, "Ever seen Gravity?" I wrote, "Touché," and nothing else, wondering what the response would be. After only 3 minutes and 51 seconds, the paper fluttered back to me. "Do ask something interesting, please. A smartass indeed." "How are you doing this?" The response came at the 2-minute mark. "Ours is a special ability. Ours. There's more than one of you." After only 1 minute and 3 seconds, the answer was, "A necessary question." Ask another. I suddenly felt anxious. I had been at ease for most of the process, odd as it may sound, but the clear eagerness of the demand ask another gave me pause. Should I continue? Was I getting into something dangerous? I began the process unconvinced that even one of the strange closet entities existed, and now I was being told by some invisible force that there may be multiple unseen beings living on top of my closet, communicating with me through a piece of paper from which my own writing kept magically disappearing. I actually felt afraid, but I sent another message. I stupidly sent another message. "Who are you?" The answer this time was almost instantaneous. I barely had time to start the stopwatch before the paper floated off the closet and landed before me. What I read there made no sense. It seemed such a bizarre answer to the question, and while I was staring at the page trying to get my brain to work, I felt a building sense of anxiety creeping from my toes to my ears, a tingling sense of danger building in my spine. Too late. First letter of each sentence. Read the solution aloud, please. I'll tell you who I am if you complete this task. It was the longest sentence the closet had returned. It was also the weirdest. Stupidly, I ignored my sense of mounting panic, desperate to complete the task and solve the mystery. "I am Dana Scully. I am Dana Scully," I kept chanting in my head. First letter of each sentence. I used to love these silly puzzle games. I racked my brain to remember the entire conversation, but after some scribbling I recalled all of it. Hello, my name is Ripley. I know. What's your name? Not important. Are you real? Evidently so. If you're real, why can't I see you? Ever seen Gravity? Touche. Do ask something interesting, please. How are you doing this? Ours is a special ability, ours. There's more than one of you. Unnecessary question. Ask another. Who are you? Too late. But when I was finished, I isolated all the first letters, and the message didn't make any sense. Hinny-tout-out. Total nonsense. Then it dawned on me. Maybe just use every first letter of the responses. After all, if there's a hidden message, how could I have had any part in it if I didn't know it in the first place? I arranged all the letters from the closet's response into a line. My heart sank. A lump rose in my throat. My palms started to sweat. I need out. For some insane reason, even though the message was already creepy enough that I should have stopped, that I should have torn up the page and gone straight to the housing office to switch rooms. Some insane, visceral urge to complete the task and a sweeping desire to solve the mystery overwhelmed me, and I read out loud, I need out. The room instantly fell eerily silent. It seemed a vacuum had formed in my little dorm room. Simultaneously, all the air seemed to be sucked from my lungs, and a freezing cold seized me by the shoulders as I watched a swirling shadow gather in the space above the closet and spill over the edge into the room. Spiraling and creeping toward me like an inky fog, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I could only sit there, watching the fog approach me and engulf first my legs, then my torso, then my neck, and soon everything was blackness and burning cold and indecipherable, painful silence. And then I woke up here, in this void. Only this little notebook was here. When I open my eyes, I can't see my body and I don't appear to have any corporeal form, but I still feel like myself. And I can somehow write this, and I can somehow see. When I woke up, I saw out into my bedroom. From above, from on top of the closet, I saw a thing that looks like me. That looks just like Ripley. When it sensed that I was awake, the thing that looks like me climbed onto my bed and peered into the space above the closet where I am trapped and said in a voice that sounds just like mine but with different, stiffer inflections, Hello, my name is Ripley. That's who I am. Now you have your answer. You're welcome for the notebook. I wanted to respond, wanted to yell that nitrogen monoxide. I am Ripley. You're not Ripley. You aren't me. I don't want this stupid notebook. I want you to let me go. But I couldn't. I can only write and presumably push things off the top of the closet, or make them disappear temporarily, or erase things. And now that thing from the top of the closet is walking around as me, and it's going to keep up the pretense. So I'm writing this tale down, and maybe someday, when the fake Ripley leaves and someone else moves into this room, I will push this book off the top of the closet, and maybe that someone will start reading, thinking it's all a bizarre mishap, and maybe they'll become interested in my story. Maybe they'll be a thrill seeker willing to test the boundaries. Maybe they'll be a curious fan of the X-Files. Maybe they'll want to talk to me. Maybe they'll tell me their name, but I'll already know it, and my task will be to lure them, to trick them into saying aloud that I need out. Story 3. Living in a haunted sorority. I never understood why ghosts are always depicted as creepy little girls in Victorian dresses. Real ghosts are never like that, or at least my ghost isn't. My ghost killed herself in my sorority house in the 80s. So it would be weird if she was wearing a Victorian dress. I only ever saw her once, sitting on the edge of my bed in the reflection of my mirror. Her hair was black and curly. It looked as though it had been teased a hell before deflating into knotty locks of badly permed hair. She was wearing an oversized collared shirt tucked into mom jeans, and from the mascara streaming down her face, I could tell she had been crying. She didn't look like a ghost, at least not what ghosts are supposed to look like. I turned away from the mirror, thinking a drunk friend of one of my sisters had snuck in after a theme party. But when I laid my eyes on the corner she had been sitting on, she was gone. I'm getting ahead of myself. I had never actually seen her until my junior year. In fact, she didn't even seem to exist the whole first semester of my freshman year, although that could have been because my sisters didn't want to scare me away from my newly joined sorority, Tri Delta. The first time she was mentioned to me, I was hanging out with some other sorority sisters in my friend Summer's room at the house. She was older, a senior, and her roommate was hardly ever home because she always stayed over with her boyfriend. There was a ghost in my room last night. Summer told us in a hushed tone. Bullshit. My friend Amy laughed, throwing a pillow at her. No, really? Okay, well, not a ghost, but maybe one of those orb things, you know, like the kind they see in those ghost hunter shows. I think you've been watching those shows too much. I scoffed. I didn't believe in ghosts then, let alone those dumbass orbs. Besides, Summer was one of those air-brained hippie types. This hallucination was easy to write off as some sort of side effect from her last acid trip. I woke up in the dead of the middle of the night for literally no reason, she told us, completely ignoring our skepticism. I was completely paralyzed, like I couldn't move at all, and it was pitch dark too. Right? And I just see this orb of light moving back and forth, like a pendulum. She traced the orb's supposed motion in the air with an outstretched finger, eyes focused above our heads. Sounds like sleep paralysis. Amy shrugged, hopping off of Summer's bed. Paralysis, hallucinations, yep. Definitely not a ghost. Summer's nose crinkled up and her expression twisted. Wait, do you smell that? Amy and I both inhaled through our noses, and sure enough, a distinct, fiery smell had inexplicably filled her room. Okay, why the fuck does it smell like fire? Amy asked, her face turning white. We all had a mini freak out until we exited the room in a panic, only to be informed by a sister that the fraternity next door's dumpster had caught on fire and everyone was going to the balcony to watch the firemen. I was happy to put the embarrassing incident out of my mind until a few months later, when Summer brought the ghost up again. This time I could see her, like all of her, and I could feel her too. Not just the weight on my bed, but the sadness. She was really sad. I think she was crying, and she looked way different from a normal ghost. Like I've never seen a modern ghost before, you know. This time, Amy was gone, and I decided to play along for shits and giggles. Well, is there any record of a death in here? Maybe we can go to the library and look at old newspapers with one of those machine thingies. How the hell would I know how to use one of those? We should just ask the house mom, who, let's find her in the composite pictures. I jumped up excitedly, Summer following me to the back hallway. Every year that Tri Delta had been on campus, everyone in the sorority would go out front and get their photos taken by the old oak tree. It'd be put in a giant frame that showed all of the members. The composite would be displayed in our living room that year until it was replaced with the new one and shuffled off to the back hallway. A long, narrow hallway lined up with giant frames filled with hundreds of tiny sorority girl faces smiling manically. You got pretty creepy at night, but it was always fun to look at decades past and make fun of the various phases of hairdos. Summer and I found the section of composites from the 80s and began scanning the different faces for our ghost. Having never seen the ghost, my only two descriptors were black permed hair and sad, which didn't leave me much to go off of, so I would just jokingly point at every girl with black curly hair to the annoyance of Summer. I bored pretty quickly of this game, though Summer was staring at each and every face with a sort of intensity I had never seen in her. I was about to give up when I pointed at the last picture, half a smirk on my face as I looked towards Summer, then towards the picture. The moment I saw her eyes, I froze. I knew in my head that if I wanted to, I could move, but somehow I wasn't willing to. She was smiling just like everyone else in the frame, but her eyes, they made me sad. "Do you smell that?" Summer asked, breaking me out of my trance and sending me jumping to feet in the air. I knew what the smell was before I could even inhale fire. "That's not another dumpster fire," I whispered. Completely freaked out, we decided to pay our house mom a visit to do some investigating. Our house mom, a fat, balding woman named Pam, was on the verge of quitting her job with Summer quickly approaching, and it showed in her "I don't give a shit" attitude. "Hey, Pam." We called into her empty living quarters, poking our heads through the open door. Pam came trundling out, flopping down into an office chair and looking at us with raised eyebrows. "Yeah." She nodded slightly, motioning for us to come in. "So, like, this house isn't you haunted, is it?" I asked, my face probably still pale as the smell of fire lingered in my nostrils. "Oh yeah," she grunted nonchalantly, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. "Whenever you girls go home over the break, there's always noises upstairs." "You mean like the walls settling, right? Because that happens like every 30 seconds. Summer asked, a look of pure excitement on her face. No. I know the creaks of this old house like the back of my hand. I've lived here for 10 years. These sounds are unmistakable. Footsteps, drawers opening and closing. A couple times I heard someone crying. I even went upstairs to see if someone had somehow snuck in while the house was closed. But no, she's real. I think the old house mom said something about a girl offing herself in the late 80s, but that was 10 years ago, and I was barely paying attention. Anyway," the old woman shrugged, leaning further back in her chair before catching a glimpse of our terrified faces and bursting out laughing. "You girls don't have any reason to be scared. It's not like a ghost can do much else than knock your coffee cup over, although that will not be an acceptable excuse when you get fined for staining the carpet." Pam seemed right, at least for the following few weeks that led to summer break without much incident. Summer moved out, got her diploma, and moved to Seattle for graduate school, and it was finally my turn to move into the house, into a big 4-person room with a window right above the front door that we would shout at our friends through as they walked to class. My roommate, Amy, Carrie and Marley all got along well, even if Amy was a slob and Marley never turned off her closet light. There were a few times when I would get spooked by the sound of the air vents creaking or some paper falling off of my desk, but for the most part I was perfectly happy to repress any notion that I was living with a ghost. That is, until Marley started talking to it. A few months into our sophomore year, Marley was diagnosed with epilepsy after a scary seizure episode, and she was put on a medication called carbamazepine, an anticonvulsant. The medicine stopped the seizures well enough, but it also caused Marley terrible insomnia, which often left her sitting in our room all night staring blankly ahead, unable to think or eat because of how tired she was. Marley later told me it was during this time that she first caught a glimpse of the ghost in the mirrors, barely able to function and failing out of her program in special education. Marley's doctors finally put her on sleeping pills. This should have solved the problem, but the pills had a really strange effect on her. It started out with her occasionally taking the pill too early and being suddenly hit with exhaustion downstairs or in the bathroom, so that we practically had to carry her to bed. Once she finally figured out the timing with the pills, she would wake up having put herself under the bed sometime during the night, or we would find her walking out of the room dead asleep. The problem was, while the pills were able to put Marley's mind to sleep, her body remained awake. It was easy enough to handle if we locked the door and guided a sleepwalking Marley back to her bed. On occasion, everything would be fine, and we all loved Marley so much that we didn't mind a few minutes of lost sleep. Usually these episodes were pretty noisy and active, with Marley shuffling things around our room or nosily trying to unlock our bedroom door. But one night I woke up to find Marley standing completely still, staring at something in the mirror. "You okay, Mar?" I asked drowsily, hanging my hand over the top bunk railing to wave at her and see if she was asleep. "She wants to talk to me," Marley said, her voice completely devoid of any emotion and eerily lacking her typical strong southern accent. "What?" I asked, pulling my hand back and sitting myself up, my stomach flopping. "She wants to talk to me, but she doesn't know how," Marley repeated. At this point, Marley's voice had woken up Carrie, who was already getting out of bed. "What the fuck? Dude, just put her to bed," she muttered, pulling Marley away from the mirror and tucking her in. This didn't happen again for another few weeks, until I woke up to find Marley standing in front of the mirror again, using her hands to speak sign language. I knew Marley was learning sign language as a part of her program, but what shocked me was how flawlessly she seemed to be signing into the mirror, especially after having spent hours a day in front of the mirror practicing and worrying about passing tests. I assumed that what she was signing wasn't actually real, just some version she had made up in her sleep state. So I began shimmying down my bunk bed ladder to guide her back to bed. "Marley, it's too late for practicing right now." "Okay." Marley stopped signing abruptly, but I found a way to talk to her. She said in the same emotionless voice, sending a shiver up my spine, "You're having some weird dreams, aren't you, bud?" I shook my head, trying to shake the gut-wrenching fear. "She wants to talk to you too, but you can't see her. She's very sad." The smell of fire filled the room. Alarms were going off in my head, my heart beating and head spinning, and I yanked Marley away from the mirror, terrified of my own reflection, and shoved her into bed forcefully before scrambling up to my bed and hiding frozen beneath the covers. The next day I called a roommate meeting. How Marley was off at class to tell Carrie and Amy what had happened, I don't know. I'm probably getting freaked out for no reason, but you guys were dead asleep, and after the whole ghost thing with Summer, I just get freaked out really easily. No, dude, that happened to me too. Carrie interrupted me, her eyes wide, just the other night. Scared the shit out of me. But I didn't know about all that other stuff with Summer. What the fuck? Amy said into her hands as she rubbed her forehead. I thought she would have a similar reaction as she had had with Summer, but instead she just cupped her face in her hands and mumbled. It happened to me too. Shit, I sigh. So this is fucking real. What do we do? The three of us devised a plan, making sure that in no way Marley would find out what was happening. She was pretty religious, and a scaredy cat at that. And with all of her different health issues, we weren't wanting to add bad mental health to the pile. As badly as I wanted to cover the mirrors, or smash them, or whatever, that would be a bit too obvious. So we decided that any time one of us was woken up, we'd wake up the other two and get Marley away from the mirror as quickly as possible. Carrie snuck into the student church next door and stole some holy water with her hydro flask to sprinkle around the room and throw at the mirror. Amy bought a bucket of crystals and dream catchers. Marley already had plenty of jewelry with crosses on them, so we figured we were good on that front. Things only got worse, and the three of us lost a lot of sleep. I became so terrified that if I was sleep-deprived enough, I would begin seeing the ghost like Marley, which ironically worsened my sleep at night. It got to the point that she was up signing nearly every night, at which point we figure it couldn't get any worse until I walked into the bathroom to find her signing into the mirror in a trance-like state in the middle of the day. The house being a sorority, there were mirrors in every corner, plenty of opportunity to pull Marley in. It seemed to begin taking a toll on Marley, too. She began complaining of headaches and skipping class, losing interest in the program she was once so passionate about. Her temper worsened, too, throwing her into a rage at little things such as a full trash can or water accidentally spilled on the floor. When she began sleeping around with guys like it was nothing, which was completely out of character, we finally made the decision to tell her what had been going on with her. At first, she was unable to believe us, laughing and thinking it was a joke. Then, with her new temper, she was angry at us for making up a cruel story to try and scare her. Carrie began crying, which none of us had ever seen before, and Marley became very quiet. Acceptance. She knew something was wrong with her, that she had become a person she couldn't recognize but because of a ghost. She never outwardly admitted to accepting that this crazy, terrifying thing was happening to her. But a week later she had dropped out of school, and another week after that she was on a flight home to South Carolina without so much of a goodbye. As heartbroken as we were also relieved. With Marley gone, the ghost was gone too, and the entire next semester of my sophomore year went by without incident. Part of me worried that somehow, since the ghost had disappeared, Marley had taken it with her. A selfish, horrible part of me wished this was the case, but slowly Marley got better, and she often sent us letters in the mail or facetimed us from her new dorm. With the trauma seemingly behind us, we began to get braver and telling the stories of those horrifying nights, suddenly relishing in the fearful reactions of our sisters. Any time something went wrong, it was now common to blame it on the Trid ghost, and we even went so far as to nickname her Gertrude. As junior year came around, I moved back into the house, into a two-person room this time, and Amy and Carrie moved far away into their own apartment, calling me crazy for voluntarily continuing to live in a haunted house. I liked living there with all my friends. It was on campus, and hey, the rent was cheap. Some girls would occasionally claim that they had caught a glimpse of the Trid ghost in a mirror late at night, but things were so quiet that I hardly cared to believe them. Unfortunately, this was also the semester that we found out our chapter would be suspending operations at the end of the year. Without getting into the depressing details, our sorority wasn't the most popular on campus, and we no longer had enough members to pay for the cost of the house or its staff, let alone the social events that are a core part of sorority life. If you look up Tri Delta Phi Beta, the second result is a link leading to the official announcement. As you can imagine, this got us all to feeling pretty sad and sorry for ourselves, and the mood was pretty heavy in the house for a few weeks. Maybe it was the negative atmosphere that caused the ghost to come back. I think she came back because she was angry. See, we'll probably be renting our house out to a fraternity while our sorority suspends operations, and I imagine any heartbroken ghost would be pretty mad about that. Other than the mere sightings of the ghost, which I refused to believe, the first sign that the ghost was back and more malicious than before, happened one night as I was coming home from the bars, feeling drunk and ready to throw off my heels. I was halfway up the back stairway when a blood-curdling scream stopped me dead in my tracks and sent me running to the room Summer lived in when I was a freshman. My good friend Bailey now lived in the room, and I recognized the scream as hers as I came bursting into a pitch-black room, turning the light on to reveal nothing, just a terrified Bailey, her face white as chalk and her hands shaking profusely. Apparently, her roommate was up pulling an all-nighter in the library, leaving Bailey alone to sleep. Once Bailey was calmed down enough, she told me in a shaking voice, I could see her as clear as day, even though it was pitch black in here. She was sitting on the edge of the bed and crying. I finished the sentence for her, remembering Summer's story. No, Bailey said, surprising me as she shook her head. She was smiling. Even our house chef, a tirelessly cheery guy named Antonio, would tell us about the strange things that happened in his kitchen. He'd tell us about how one morning, as he was preparing lunch, a microwave would start up out of nowhere, or how a cup of water sitting on a completely flat table would tip over abruptly. Of course, each tale was delivered to us in a half-joking way, as if he himself couldn't believe these strange things. One evening, as I came home from class, one found the house, with all of its doors and windows propped open, the whole house smelling as if the girls had been smoking packs of cigarettes. Why are all of the doors open? I asked as I flopped down on a living room couch. And who was smoking? Antonio did a whole sage cleanse before heading home. One girl told me casually, apparently he saw something that really spooked him. Please, another girl scoffed. Ghosts aren't real, and that shit seriously smells. The next morning, I went straight to the kitchens to grill Antonio what had happened, only to come upon his assistant chef cooking some eggs for another girl. Alma was super sweet and loved to chat. Even though her English wasn't amazing, I exchanged my usual pleasantries with her, buttering up a bagel, hoping to catch Antonio in the back, when I noticed a huge bandage on her hand. "Whoa, what happened to you?" "Get a little clumsy with the frying pan." Alma's smile disappeared from her face immediately, and she went to move her hand into one of her apron pockets. "Nothing." "An accident." I had to laugh at her, looking all ashamed, like a puppy in trouble. "Oh, come on, that's nothing. I used to cut myself all the time when I had to cook for myself. Or was it something more embarrassing? Like one time my friend was making a sugar scrub and she completely melted off her hand with boiling sugar. The more I spoke, the more Alma seemed to be receding from me, so I stopped talking with an awkward laugh and a shrug and finished buttering my bagel. Just as I was about to leave, Alma caught my eye and whispered, "Few en espiritu." I knew enough Spanish from high school to know what she was saying a spirit. So what, the ghost was getting violent now? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. At that moment Antonio walked in from the back door, and Alma and I both turned away from each other as if we had never had the conversation, and so the pattern continued. Small, harmless, yet unexplainable things would occur around the house, building up until bam, another accident, leaving the girl it had happened to terrified. The severity of the attacks seemed to escalate as well, starting with the cut, leading to someone's shirt being pulling from behind them so hard it nearly choked them before ripping. Then a girl waking up with some unexplained, nasty bruises. Then a week later, another girl falling down the stairs and breaking her collarbone. Annie was the one who fell down the stairs, and for a week she refused to talk about it at all. If questioned about it, she'd simply reply that she was sleep-deprived and tripped, and that she was tired of explaining what happened over and over again. To be honest, I was really hoping that this was the truth. I had taken notice of the pattern of violence, and I was terrified. The end of the year was approaching, and so was the closure of our sorority. How desperate and angry could the ghost get? Unfortunately, Annie would soon reveal to me that this was in fact not the truth. During a night out at the bars together, she drunkenly pulled me to the side, looked me in the eyes, and told me I didn't fall, you know. I was pushed. What? I answered, hoping I had heard her wrong over the music. I saw her, like really saw her, and once you see her you're marked, she slurred, leaning on me for support. As drunk as I was, I had to believe her. That night, my roommate fell out of her bed. She woke up on the floor, a little groggy and out of it, and, not realizing she had broken her head open and was bleeding everywhere with a concussion, she crawled back into bed and fell asleep. When I got home, I was horrified to find the floor covered in blood. My roommate still as a statue in the top bunk. I really feared the worst. I really thought she was dead. She survived just barely. If I hadn't found her in bed, it's very likely the concussion would have stopped her from waking up ever. After 3 days in the hospital, she moved out of the sorority back home, half an hour away, leaving me to sleep in my room alone. When I asked her if she had seen the ghost, she couldn't remember. As I write this, I am taking yet another break from studying for finals, which are a week away. One more week until we could all be free from this nightmare. It had been a few weeks since my roommate's accident, and I was really beginning to have hope that hers would be the last incident. But you've already read the beginning of the story, so you already know. While I was taking a study break, I looked into the mirror and I saw her. As I write this, I can smell it just as clearly as the first time. Fire.